What's going on, everyone? I hope you're having a great day. Today we're looking at my top 5 drop spots for World's Edge, Kings Canyon, and Olympus. I would love to go over every single spot, but I cannot go over every single spot because there's just way too many. There's something like 70 POIs on all 3 of the maps right now. One big thing to note before I do get into my favorite spots is that the dropship path absolutely matters. This almost always dictates where I am going to be dropping, as I don't really ever drop more than halfway through the dropship path, especially if I am going for kills. Be sure to hit that like button. I appreciate your support, and let's just jump right into the first map. We're going to be going in order the maps were released. So first up is Kings Canyon. My first recommendation is going to be artillery. I find artillery is conducive to being located in a really great spot, not too centrally located in the map to the point where enemies could be coming from anywhere, but also not too far to the edge where you'll be rotating for a long while. Artillery has pretty good loot between the buildings, the main wall, and the little bunkers in the front of the POI. This means you can land here and generally be able to separate yourself well enough from others so you can have a little loot before pushing a team. Rotations are really great. Containment, Spotted Lake, and even Capacitor are all pretty close and usually have people in them. Containment is going to be an alternative drop spot for artillery if you want even more action, but I find that the loot in Containment is just god-awful, and there's just way too many people here to have it really be a reliable drop spot, I'll say. But if you do want a lot of action, then I would generally probably land at Containment. Second up is going to be labs. Labs for me is somewhere I'll go knowing that I'll probably going to get into a pretty dicey situation. I personally never really like flying into the rift, but rather landing at the bunker door and then running inside. I find it does allow for, again, much more reliability in my landing and less random punch-in after getting into the bunker through the portal. Labs is another spot with superb rotations to Cage, Hydro, Repulsor, and of course Capacitor through the tunnel. And Capacitor also has a ton of people at it usually. Of course, you can take that portal as well to get even further away to get more fights, which I find is really nice if you want to get all the way over to the middle of the map. I will suggest Capacitor to be the alternative landing spot to Labs if your dropship path is coming in from the north rather than the south. I would definitely give Labs a try. I also enjoy how it's a multi-level area with the buildings on the outside too. It definitely creates some fun and unique engagements. Taking the third spot is going to be my sleeper pick on Kings Canyon, and this is the buildings outside of Gauntlet. This area isn't the craziest in terms of loot, but it's much safer than landing at Gauntlet, and it will allow you to get a gun and then run into Gauntlet to third party a fight. I find it much more reliable than Gauntlet 2, which can just be absurd sometimes with tons of players landing here. If you do want a bigger challenge, then just drop right into Gauntlet. I will say this area also will help you be a little less jammed into the corner, so if no one does go Gauntlet and you want to fight, you can take the balloon to go north or east right away. Taking the second spot on my list is actually going to be Spotted Lake. This area is similar to Gauntlet, where sometimes if the dropship isn't near it at the start, it might not be the best to go here. But if you are dropping here, I usually find it to be pretty healthy in terms of people and loot to get. The loot is actually pretty crazy here. There's a ton of it, and there's a lot of different areas you can land in, which once again increases your chance of surviving in the early game and actually being able to fight because you're going to get a weapon. Rotations are again solid, containment is very close, or even runoff, which occasionally will have a team down there. Of course, you also have the pit to run up to if Spotted Lake is empty and you are hearing shots up there. Spot for me feels like the healthiest spot on Kings Canyon in terms of loot, and on my list, it's probably the #1 spot to go to if you do want to be sure that you are going to get a gun. Before we hit the top spot for Kings Canyon, my honorable mention is going to be Caustic Treatment. Caustic has just absolutely incredible loot. It has 4 gold items, often leading to a great gun, backpack, or even armor. On top of this, there's a crazy amount of pills and floral loot, making it really great to gear up early on. My main problem for Caustic Treatment is that it's a little bit too far away from other hot zones like Gauntlet, Market, Containment, Capacitor, Labs. All of these spots I find are where people really are going. If the dropship path isn't starting over Caustic Treatment, I just find it's way too quiet. Mid-game will be absolutely dead, and early game if no one's landing there. And for me, I'm just not looking for this. But if you do desire sod loot, then definitely give Caustic Treatment a look at. And my top spot for Kings Canyon for the best mix of kills and loot is going to be Market. Market is positioned so superbly to the point where you can easily rotate to Salvage, you can go up to Cage, or you can take a quick balloon ride to Salvage over to Gauntlet, or take a second balloon ride at the complex north of Gauntlet that we previously mentioned. All these areas usually have enemies landing in them as well, which makes for endless fights through the mid game, which is what I really want for a healthy action-filled match. The loot in Market definitely isn't as good as Spotted Lake, but it definitely isn't bad, and you have the option to break off to go outside of Market or even to the complex south of Market if it does seem like Market's going to be a little bit too hot for you. You can also go to Salvage since it is right next door. Market for me just feels like the best mix of kills and loot, and it's somewhere that I have been landing for a long while now on Kings Canyon. I absolutely recommend it, and maybe I'll see you there. Before we move on to World's Edge, be sure to follow me on Twitter. I appreciate the support. And also, if you want to catch me live, head over to Twitch where we do stream. I would love to chat with you. Moving on to World's Edge, we are going to have staging at the number 5 spot. Much like labs from Kings Canyon, I absolutely love the way staging is laid out with the multi-variation in heights between the tracks, the main building, and the lower ground. For me personally, I always recommend landing on the tracks. Landing on the ground is a big no-go for me, as being in the middle of both sides just doesn't seem to work too well. Landing on the building is okay, but it's usually contested, so it's not as good as the tracks in my opinion. The loot at staging is just okay. I will say it's nothing crazy in terms of the amount, but I always seem to get a decent weapon here. Staging is another spot that is decently located where you can go thermal to the south if that's a hot zone, or you can go harvester, you can go to countdown, you can go to landslide. Even further spots like tree, lava siphon, fragment, they all don't really seem that far away from me. Staging is great. It's my underrated pick for World's Edge, and I think you should try it. The one big thing I will say about staging is that the dropship path absolutely needs to fly over if you do want a healthy amount of people there. If it's not too close to the dropship path, I just don't find really that many people are going there. Next, I am going to pick the new Season 10 area, Big Mod. Big Mod, as the making of this video, is just absolutely wild. Unless it's very far, it's almost always worth going there because you are going to get a fight, which is pretty nice. The area also has just an absurd amount of pills and loot, which leads you to being fairly kitted every time. And of course, you can unlock those special boosted guns from the stations. If you are unaware, these guns should not be slept on, and the magazine size increase and the reload speed increase is just so insane. An alternate landing spot for Big Mod is going to be Lava City to the south. Lava City is absolutely close enough where you can pick up a couple guns and run over to Big Mod and try to third party the teams that are already fighting. And I find your odds of success might be a little bit higher if you do this. Lava Siphon, though, it does feel like the only rotation, so you may lack a little mid-game if there's not a lot of teams landing at Lava Siphon, but I think it's okay. There's a lot of good loot at Big Mod, and it's definitely worth a try. Our number 3 spot is going to be Countdown. Countdown is probably my personal favorite on this list for World's Edge in terms of the balance of loot to action. Starting with the rotations though, out of Countdown, you really only have Skyhook, as Lava Fissure feels pretty dead these days. You do have the option to go to Fragment, but it's a bit further than I would like, but it is pretty similar to what we were saying with staging earlier. Skyhook can be pretty great though, as it does have a lot of people that land there if the dropship path is from the north or western sides, so this is a big plus. Countdown itself though is a great spot with a nice amount of loot, and more importantly, it's big. This lets you have multiple areas that you can land if it is going to be contested. I personally like landing at the southern building and then rotating around to the other side as needed to kill the enemies. Countdown is great. And one last thing, don't forget the middle can open up to get you a purple or blue armor, sometimes a gold armor even. I like to have myself or a squad member land on the door buttons and then have the other teammates land down in the middle, instantly getting these armor upgrades and usually a weapon. The number 2 spot for World's Edge is going to be none other than Season 10's new POI, Lava Siphon. Much like Countdown for me, Lava Siphon is an extremely large point of interest, which allows for a lot of people to land here and a lot of loot. This means you'll have more success with your landing, and randomness is a bit less than some of the other small areas. I personally like landing at the main bunker building in the side of the mountain and not at the gondola areas. Landing and going right inside, you will always find a weapon on the ground in the first room. If not the first room, you can just go down the stairs and there'll probably be a couple guns right there. Fights here are almost always guaranteed. Someone more times than not seems to always land on the middle station, which for landing at the mountain building is really great. If no one lands there though, you are positioned more or less in the middle, so you can have the option to go to any of the stations. Rotations out of Lava Siphon aren't the best, but they aren't the worst either. You almost have to go to Fragment if you are leaving Lava Siphon, but of course it's just Fragment Edge, right? You can also go to Tree if there's players down that way. You can go to Harvester, you can go to Big Mud. I find that the rotation aspect of Lava Siphon does not matter as much because a lot of players from Tree, Launch Site, Dome, Big Mod, Geyser, or even Harvester are all going to be rotating to, which means continual fighting without really the need to rotate around. Lava Siphon is really great. I would definitely give it a try if you want some action. It's not quite Fragment level action, but it is definitely really good. Before the top spot, we are going to have Skyhook as my honorable mention. If you are coming into the map straight over this area, I find Skyhook can be pretty crazy. Skyhook is conducive to the same thing as many of the other POIs on World's Edge. It is a very large area for a singular area. This lets you land in many different spots, and if it is packed, finding some loot seems to be fairly easy. I personally like landing on the side closest to Countdown or Trials. Landing down there in that corner lets me quickly rotate to Countdown if Skyhook is a little bit quiet. Skyhook, though, is the honorable mention because it's a lot like caustic treatment. It's up in the corner. If a lot of people aren't landing here, then I find your mid game could be a little bit quiet. I don't think that should discourage you, though. I do like fighting in and around the buildings, and it allows for a lot of creativity with your engagements. And of course, you guessed it, the top spot for World's Edge for kills and loot is going to be all of Fragment. I hate that I have to recommend landing here for kills, but to be completely honest, you call it Fragment Edge for a reason. You more or less have to land at Fragment if you want any chance at a high kill game. For me, it's going to be anything over 10, which does kind of suck in my opinion. It makes this map really predictable, and a lot of the other POIs are pretty dead because of Fragment. However, I recommend to not land at Streamer Building, but rather land in the northwestern corner building. I find this area much more reliable for surviving, and loot is usually okay. If this northwest corner is too hot, which it can be sometimes, you can land to the east in the 2 buildings north of the little market area. Of course, you do not really need to worry about rotations when you land at Fragment because the whole server is there, but usually I will run east after cleaning the western side of Fragment. Fragment, though, is going to be your go-to spot if you want kills upon kills and solid action all game long. The final map to discuss is going to be Olympus. Personally, this is my favorite map for pub games due to the overall flow, and I think the loot on Olympus is a bit more healthy than the other maps because it is newer and it is a little bit more modern in terms of the Apex Legends lifecycle. I only say this because you can land almost anywhere on Olympus and still find decent loot for the most part, which does expand our options quite a bit. I am really going to be selecting the spots on Olympus just for kills and rotations rather than loot because, again, it's pretty much solid anywhere you go. We are going to start with Gardens at number 5 for me. Gardens is a spot that I do not go to too often because I don't love the rotations out of it, especially since the balloon was removed back at the start of Season 9, but Gardens can be really great for action, and it's laid out in a way that allows separate fighting to happen depending on where you do drop, whether it be the top middle, the bottom middle, or either of the flanking sides. The loot is of course decent, as with all of Olympus. I land Gardens really if the dropship path is starting over on that side, as it can be pretty crowded, which is fun from time to time, but I will say there isn't quite as many people landing here as there is on some of the other spots that we are going to cover. Fight Night is going to be the next pick for me. Fight Night is pretty similar to Gardens in my eyes. However, with Fight Night, I trade some loot and landing options for the ability to get more players closer together. Fight Night is always packed, which can be good or bad. Rotations out of Fight Night are also pretty solid as it is densely located between many areas. Unlike Gardens, I also find it more times than not adjacent teams at Carrier, Docks, or Turbine will come over to join in on the fun. I like Fight Night more than Gardens, but out of any place on Olympus on my list, Fight Night might be the least reliable in terms of surviving off the drop. One thing I will say is I really don't care for the boxing ring. I'm not going to drop in there to try to punch people. It's just not what I'm interested in. I'll land up top and go through the building and then really control height rather than landing down low. At number 3, we are going to have Estates. Estates, in my mind, is the hottest zone on Olympus for players. I don't have it up top because, honestly, it's a cluster and it's a little bit too random for me. The buildings can be hit or miss in terms of loot, and I find that if you don't get a gun in your building when you are landing, it's gonna go poorly. I try to land on the larger side buildings or straight up in the middle, but landing in the middle is risky on its own. Estates is really a recommendation of mine because of the amount of bodies that are landing here. If it wasn't for this sole fact alone, I don't think I would be recommending it. I actually can recommend landing just outside of Estates to the southwest. This area near the wall has some decent loot with much less players, if anyone, landing there. You can also rotate to Estates from here, or quickly third-party everyone that is landing in Estates, or you can even rotate up to Oasis if you are hearing fights over there. Estates is located quite nicely on the map though, and you'll never really have to go far for a mid-game fight, which is a plus. Estates is a great pick if you do want a challenge. Oasis is taking my number 2 spot and is also my Olympus sleeper pick. Oasis loot is honestly incredible. The area is also fairly large and spread out, which means, again, you can have multiple teams landing here, and you will be able to separate yourself from them, making sure that you can get some loot. If you didn't know, there are always gold or purple items down bottom, which is really nice, and it's a little bonus if you do land here. One downfall for Oasis is the fact that it's positioned all the way on one side of the map. This could make it harder to get to or a little bit quiet if the drop path isn't positioned correctly. That being said, there is a zip line going over towards the middle of Turbine, and there is even a trident here, so rotations aren't terrible or unbearable. Oasis is really solid, and it's definitely one of my go-to spots in my games. My honorable mention for Olympus is going to be Array. Array is actually sneaky good, but it does lack other people going here from time to time. Array is positioned perfectly to allow you to go to Hammond Labs via the balloon that is there. Also a quick run up the hill to Bonsai if the zone is in favor of that area. Array is also spread out to the point where you do have that survivability in terms of landing on different sides if needed. Array is another POI that has a little trick to it, and that is that there is always sniper or marksman weapons in the middle of this area. This means guaranteed weapons, which is an underrated thing in my opinion. Knowing that you're going to be landing somewhere and getting a gun is pretty good. Array just doesn't have as much traffic as the other zones, but it is a pretty good pick if you want a solid mid game because of that balloon that is there. And taking the top spot is actually my favorite point of interest on all of the maps, and this is going to be Energy Depot. I more or less knew from the very moment Olympus dropped that Energy Depot had something very special. It's a combination of 2 levels on one side and a variation of separation on the 3 sides that make it very attractive as a landing spot. This separation once again lets you pick and choose landing spots, and it'll let you really split up the amount of fights you are required to take right away. I find loot here to be some of the best in the entire map, if not the best. I pretty much always walk into it getting a weapon immediately after landing. This means I can take another moment to keep looting or proceed to fight anyone that might be on the other adjacent sides. Rotations out of Depot are incredible. You have Gardens if the zone goes that way. You got Hammond, you got the Graveyard, you got Turbine, you got Rift, you even got Power Grid. There's also an adjacent balloon nearby, which lets you quickly fly up to Gardens if needed. I even find that the revive beacons in Energy Depot and on the other side towards Hammond are often used, meaning free kills, an action that just keeps going all game long. Energy Depot just seems like the most balanced and reliable for me, which is why I love it. So where are your favorite drop spots right now? Drop a comment down below and let me know your favorite spot for each map. Also, do you have any sleeper spots that you want to share? Let us know, or not if you want them to yourselves. Be sure to hop into our community Discord if you want to chat with the community and myself, or if you are looking for others to play with. I appreciate the support, and I will see you live in the Twitch streams. Peace out, everyone.